Welcome to the Volpe Report podcast, the state's premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians. I'm your host, Chuck Volpe. Join us now as we speak to this week's guest.
The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is brought to you by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
In what's an annual event on the Volpe Report, we cover the governor's budget address and his proposed budget for the upcoming state fiscal year. And having had this past week, Democratic Senator Marty Flynn give his response to the governor's budget address, on this week, we will give the Republican response in the form of Senator Joe Pittman, who is the majority leader of the Pennsylvania Senate, which is Republican-controlled in the majority. That means no budget gets passed, despite Governor Shapiro's wish list, and even though the House Democrats will support the governor's budget, no budget will pass unless, under the leadership of Joe Pittman, the Republicans agree to it. And of course, they're not going to agree to a lot of it. There will be compromises, and they'll figure out areas of commonality. So we have an important guest to break down the Republican view of where the budget needs to be trimmed in. Joe Pittman was elected to the Pennsylvania Senate for the 41st Senatorial District in May 2019 in a special election. Joe was reelected to a full 4-year term in November 2020 and recently reelected again in 2024. Senator Pittman serves as the chairman of the Senate Urban Affairs and Housing Committee and vice chairman of the Senate Environmental Resources and Energy Committee. He is also a member of 4 additional Senate committees: Appropriations, Banking and Insurance, Consumer Protection, Professional Licensure, and the Judiciary Committee. He also serves as a Senate Republican Caucus representative on the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Investment Authority Board of Directors, otherwise known as PennVest. Joe's been a leader in the effort to promote economic development, job creation initiatives, and strengthen the local economies. Senator Pittman has staunchly opposed the carbon tax known as RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The carbon tax would severely have impacted the region's coal and electric generation sectors and potentially cause the loss of thousands of good-paying, family-sustaining jobs. The senator was an integral and important voice in RGGI's defeat. It was finally withdrawn from last year's budget and completely removed. He also worked closely with county and local governments and civic organizations to foster and promote economic development and infrastructure improvement efforts to enhance the quality of life for the region and all regions. A 1995 graduate of Purchase Line High School, Pittman was appointed to its school board and served until his graduation from Pennsylvania State University with a bachelor's degree in political science. Joe is a lifetime member of the NRA and a member of the Indiana County Republican Committee. And again, on today's show, he will break down the fine print in the budget, the areas where there may be agreement, and the areas where there won't be an agreement, and they'll have to renegotiate.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Mr. Leader and friend, Senator Joe Pittman from Western Pennsylvania, thanks for making time to come back on the Volpe Report. Very timely. Every year you come. It's like Groundhog Day. Early February, the groundhog sees a shadow, or doesn't, in Punxsutawney. The governor gives his budget address, and we bring you on the show to really break down. And as a majority leader, as I've already told my viewers, no one will have more direct input, probably. I know you have appropriations chairmen in the Senate that you'll work with, but as majority leader, at the end of the day, for us to get a budget and his budget passed, they need you to sign off on it. And so, go ahead.
No, thanks, Chuck. It's always a pleasure to have me on your show. It's a great time, and as you pointed out, Punxsutawney Phil is a constituent of mine, and so I had the
Yes.
real Groundhog Day on February 2nd,
Yeah.
and then the governor's Groundhog Day on February 3rd with his budget address. But it's got to be a team effort of all of us in the Senate Republican caucus to figure a way out on this. As we've talked before, divided government's difficult, but we'll figure a way forward because we have to and we need to. But it's got to be the right product, no matter what it is.
Well, having said that, I guess not to try an irony, my hand at irony, but of course, you were on last year talking about the issues in that budget. The deadline was June 30th. Obviously, it's always past that now. I can't remember the last time we got one done June 30th, and it went well into the latter part of 2025. So the part that I guess the first question is, in only a few short months since that budget was passed, he has now added like $5.3 or so billion to this year's budget. What happened in 3 months that we need 5.5 or so billion more dollars going forward? So that's the first question. Because remember, we just agreed on last year's budget, November, a few months ago. And here we are in February, and he needs $5.5 billion more. Please take it from there.
Being all things to all people all the time is great politics. And the advantage that the governor has, and any governor, is that they get to go first. And so they get to propose their budget. They get to put all of these great, wonderful initiatives out there. They get to paper over the deficit. They get to stand up and say, we won't ever have a broad-based tax increase under this plan. And it's all fuzzy math. And the hard reality is once the governor introduces his budget, sets all these expectations with all of these constituencies, we then in the legislature have to step in and do the hard work of bringing reality to the conversation. And that's what we're going to do again. My frustration is we don't have allies in the House, in the majority, that will help us bring the reality to the conversation, which is part of why we had the impasse we had last year. I hope we can avoid that impasse this year. It's not good for anybody. I can tell you it was not fun for me personally, professionally, or any of my colleagues. But there's a balance between getting this thing done on time and getting it done properly. And that's the balance we're going to figure out a way to strike.
Well, yeah, and obviously all sides profess that. There were constituencies, important ones, that are bipartisan issues that didn't get funding they needed to. So there's pain for everybody to go around when that gets done. And Senator, your point is well taken. But then again, unlike the United States federal government that doesn't have to balance their budget, constitutionally you have to. And what happens to states, since the state will not cease to exist as businesses, you don't have the luxury of declaring bankruptcy. What happens is a huge tax burden gets dumped on everybody eventually, which would be about right in time for Josh Shapiro to be finishing up his second term. He'll have, assuming he doesn't win for president, which he's running for. So that means he'll have dumped a huge deficit on Pennsylvania right off into the future, having been everything to everybody. So, your comment on that juxtaposition of the responsibility level that he's not going to be around to clean up this mess. But go ahead.
Well, absolutely. First of all, the voters have to pass judgment in November on whether or not he should be elected to a second term. We'll leave that to the voters. But it's also no secret that he has much grander ambitions, and that's fine. I mean, everybody's entitled to having their ambitions, but at the end of the day, long after he's out of this chair, either through the decision of the voters or the decision he makes for higher office, or that he runs a cycle of 4 more years, the reality is he will be gone whenever much of this calamity comes home to really roost. We can patch things and we can delay things and kick cans down the road. But the part I don't understand is even with his improved numbers, as he likes to characterize them, the calamity is going to be much sooner than he wants to admit. And it's confounding to me that he wants to set himself up for a real crisis in the next 2 or 3 fiscal years, because that's exactly where we're heading.
Agreed. we made reference until before we came on air, and I think it's appropriate. What I didn't know until a short time ago was that Gobbler's Knob and Punxsutawney Phil comes up in your district. Punxsutawney is part of your senatorial district. And the reason for that reference is, I felt like Groundhog Day a bit, which, of course, is based on that whole thing with that great movie with Andy McDowell and Bill Murray. And the point of the movie was that he kept reliving the days over and over. It was the same thing. And I'm feeling that same sensation. And let me be more specific in an example. A while back, a friend of mine, actually, a person I supported, Republican Governor Tom Corbett. And we have not had a Republican governor since Tom Corbett. But I remember him coming on my show. Remember, I'm in my 13th year of this show, and he was running for re-election back in 2014. And he was getting beaten up by the Democrats for raising taxes, for cuts in education, and the like. The part of the story the Democrats didn't talk about, though, and that's why it's referenced to what Governor Shapiro is talking about now, Joe. Back in 2007 and 8, you recollect, we had a national economic collapse, effectively. The bubble burst on those mortgage derivatives, and the whole thing blew up, and too big to fail, from the biggest insurance companies to Goldman Sachs and everything in between. Part of what happened, just like in COVID, we got massive rainy day money from the federal government that went into a big rainy day fund. That was during the Democratic tenure of Ed Rendell. He used that money to blow up and especially the education department. All kinds of money, new positions were created. He knew that was rainy day one-time money. So guess what happened? Governor Corbett comes in office in 2011, but elected in 2010, and he looks at his budget for the first address he gave, and that billions and billions of dollars that had been there, all gone. It was all spent in Rendell's sound familiar? Back to Groundhog Day again. All gone. And then he had a massive hole in his budget, including in education. And he had to cut positions. There were layoffs. There were streamlining. And still there had to be a tax increase. And then the Democrats turned around and blamed him for it with Tom Wolf in 2014. I'm seeing a deja vu similar scenario here that Governor Shapiro is going to spend all the rainy day money he got from COVID, effectively, and instead of having a surplus, it's going to be all spent to balance all this. You're going to be stuck with a bloated budget because we all know once it goes in, right, it never comes back out, the stuff he's doing. Your comment on that. I know I talked a lot, but that's my Groundhog Day reference in respect of your district.
Well, very, very appropriate reference. Your institutional recall on this, Chuck, is absolutely important, right? We learn from history's mistakes. History repeats itself, whatever analogy you want to make with this, but you're 1,000% correct. And the bottom line takeaway is when you use one-time dollars for recurring expenses, you quickly turn yourself upside down financially. And I recall full well, Senator White was my predecessor. He was there whenever Ed Rendell did exactly what you said. And not only did Governor Rendell do it, but there was also the same dynamic of a House Democrat majority. And I remember that Senate Republican majority all those years ago saying time and time again to the school districts and the education community, understand these are one-time dollars. They are not coming back. Yet they chose to use them as recurring expenses, and they absolutely set up the fiscal cliff that Governor Corbett and the Republican legislature at that time inherited. You're 100% correct, and that's what we have to figure out how to avoid.
Yeah, agreed. So now that we kind of talked about that, another little thing before we move to, we'll take our first break after this, but before we really get into cases, the response, the Democratic response has been from both the governor, senators, Marty Flynn and others, that they want, and they're blaming the Republican Senate, well, why won't they legalize marijuana for recreational use? Why won't they legalize games of skill and chances, every bar and tavern and convenience store, which will produce a big tax boon, and things like that? Why don't we eliminate the Delaware loophole? Well, again, back to numbers. All those numbers add up to like 1.6 or 1.8 billion for all of the above. He just raised the budget 5 point some, if my math is right. If you give them their wish list, yep, we'll go along. Senate goes along, signed into legislation, all ceremonies and pens at the Capitol. Great. That only covers a quarter of the deficit that they just foisted on. Are those numbers accurate?
I believe those numbers are accurate, but it gets to the main point, and the governor did this last year. He balanced his budget on revenues that were not guaranteed. And so when you look at this budget and you look at that 1.9 billion number or whatever you want to affix to those revenue streams, if we spend what he's proposing to spend, those revenues do not come to be. What he's looking to take out of the rainy day fund would be even more. And so there's that main challenge as well. We were very fortunate last year because we cleaned $3 billion out of the couch cushions of the bureaucracy. And that's how we were able to balance last year's budget. And that's how we were able to protect the rainy day fund. Now, we believe there's more in those couch cushions of bureaucracy. And I can assure you, we want to make them as flat as a pancake. But there's only so much that we're going to be able to pull out of those bureaucratic levers to balance the budget going forward. And so we have to recognize that you can't budget on hypothetical revenues and you can't budget recurring expenses with one-time revenues. Now, I will say this. I do believe gaming reform is a space where the caucuses and the governor have a general understanding that we have to get a regulatory framework around what we're seeing. I mean, we're seeing mini casinos pop up across this Commonwealth, and I don't think that's healthy for anybody. And so that is one area where if the other caucuses would step forward with specifics and details to match what we've been proposing, then we probably can move forward in a positive direction on that one. But there again, there's a lot of details that have to be worked out on that one as well.
Well said. We're going to take a quick break and come right back with, we're going to start right into probably the biggest single chunk of the increase, like almost, I guess, just under $600 million for education increase. We'll start there. Be right back, Joe.
There are more places you can see the Volpe Report. Watch every Sunday morning at 10:30 on Fox 56 or watch on YouTube at the Volpe Report. More ways to watch. Still the same premier political talk show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians.
Joe, welcome back to the second part of our show. And like my guy Tony Kornheiser, I'm at that age where I have to put on my glasses to be able to read the fine print. Although this number I pretty well do remember. Education has been increased exponentially. And I understand that the Commonwealth Court has ruled that our commitment vis-a-vis this per student with education was unconstitutional. We had to put more money into education. So you're talking about a full almost 10% of the whole budget increase is just in that one line item in education. My feeling on this is we are below the median of all 50 states in educational performance in every geometric, every metric of measurement, every calculation. Stacey Garrity just told me a short time ago that 2/3 of our 8th grade students in public schools in Pennsylvania cannot read at an 8th grade level, which to me is not a good thing. My concern with putting all this money into education, one thing I've learned from studies, I've done views on it, that the more money you throw at problems without the guardrails and without the precise spot on where it needs to go is just throwing it away. You're just throwing it away. So I'd like your comment on that. And where do we draw the line with education? And then immediately have to look at where's the governor's promise support that he ran on for a voucher system, for school choice, for giving parents in below the median neighborhoods, which there's a lot of them in rural Pennsylvania, being able to send those talented students to schools where they can meet their challenge of their intellectual abilities. So it's a broad subject. Take it where you want.
The other element of this, Chuck, is that we continue to put more dollars into public education while educating fewer students statewide. That, to me, speaks to the fundamental problems this Commonwealth has, which at the end of the day is entirely rooted, in my opinion, on our demographics. We have a declining population. We have an aging population. We have a restricted labor force. And that is causing a lot of the push and pull that we see, particularly in other areas of our budget, such as the Medicaid space. But when it comes to education funding, it is the biggest divide that we have philosophically with our friends on the other side of the aisle. We ultimately believe in empowering parents because we believe parents have the ultimate responsibility for the future of their children's education, which we've also said means they need to take responsibility for the future of their children's education, which is why empowerment of parents is so critically important. And you're right, the governor started out with some big talk on empowering parents, and he's run away from that big time. And so that issue has been left at the altar, so to speak, by the governor, and he is completely converted to this notion that we just got to put more and more money into public schools without understanding what the results are, number one, but also understanding that we're educating fewer students. And that needs to speak then to the delivery of that educational product in terms of physical plant, labor, all of that. If you're educating fewer students, you should have fewer needs to deliver that educational opportunity. And so that's going to be, yet again, another big battle as we try to figure out this upcoming budget.
Agreed. One of the things that it seems to me, and I'd like your comment on, last time I checked, that the percentage of school districts' budgets, which is we're talking about funding education, almost 40% is their pension contribution. That's, to me, the teachers, which gets us into the PSEA and the teachers union. And not to be cynical, but he's going to need a lot of help running for president from the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingartner, people like that. And it seems to me like this is a magnificent endowment he's giving to the teachers union. It's at what point are we going to get a governor that's going to talk about reforming the pension system and how it's funded so that we can start lowering that growing, metastasizing burden on the back, which then, trickles down, Senator, as you're well aware, to senior property owners who can no longer afford to pay their property tax on fixed incomes, in danger of losing their homes that have been in families for generations. Am I being overly cynical here? Or is that sucking, to quote Ross Perot, that giant sucking sound you hear, is that?
I will say this, Chuck, when you talk about our pension liabilities specifically, a lot of that truly is inherited. And a lot of that falls at the feet of a previous governor, and that was Ed Red. Because what happened at the time was the governor, Rendell, and the legislature artificially collared down the employer contributions that should have been made to the pension fund all those years ago. And when they collared those down, they turned the fund upside down in insolvency. To Governor Corbett's great credit, we passed some very meaningful pension reforms when he came to office. But the problem is it will take decades for those reforms to work through the liabilities of the pension fund.
Because you're obligated with the old ones, correct? You can't do any. You're obligated to the old ones. You can't get out of that. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Right. So we're boxed in there to a degree. But the one thing that you've hit on too with the pensions is that calculation is based on the salaries school districts pay. So roughly 35 cents of every dollar of salary that school districts pay gets added on and goes into the pension fund. So when they negotiate contracts, when they hire superintendents, when they hire custodians for that matter, every dollar of salary that they're putting out, they're adding 35 cents onto the bill that they have to pay into the pension fund. So the school districts do have a fair amount of control in the sense that as their salaries go up, their pension obligations go up. It's a huge issue for us. The one thing I'll also say is it has stabilized. And thanks to Governor Corbett and the Republican legislature, here we are 12 years later, and we are seeing a stabilization of that fund. But that remains a big burden on our overall budget.
Agreed. Now, let me go as we're running, actually, believe it or not, out of time. If you had a wish list of things that you think you can get some agreement on with them to get a budget done, what will you need to see? What are the items you're going to need to get concessions on from this budget proposal that are going to be non-negotiable in a sense? I know everything's negotiable, but what are your big things you'd like to see get done for Pennsylvania?
The biggest thing is the budget simply spends too much as he's proposed it. Period. Full stop. It spends too much. We achieved some significant reforms in last year's budget, not only the repeal of Reggie, but also permitting reform, because we've recognized that we need long-term economic growth to turn the Commonwealth around. The demographics, the economics, the budget, the revenue all go hand in hand. And so from our vantage point, we need to just simply ratchet down the spending so we can protect as much of that rainy day fund as possible, flatten out the couch cushions of the bureaucracy, make sure that the taxpayer dollars that have already been allocated to the government are being brought back in for actual use, and they're not being squirreled away in places that we have no idea exist. And that's one of the other things we achieved in the budget last year. So to me, it's all about the spend number, bringing that down and trying to make sure we have a more fiscally stable runway in the years ahead.
Yeah, agreed. You know, you mentioned even in that little segment there a bunch of things. It would seem to me that real economic development, real economic revenue producing would be directly tied to the energy sector, Joe, that we have oceans of natural. Look, forget the sin taxes. You don't need any of that stuff if you fully tap into the energy potential, the thousands of new jobs. All of those will be taxpayers. That becomes state tax revenues. Like, if I'm correct, yeah, he agreed to get rid of Reggie, but he's talking about his own cap and trade. Isn't he? It's ridiculous. And by the way, last time I checked, the court was clear. A governor does not have that authority. That's a tax revenue type item that's the purview of the legislature completely. So I don't know where he's going with that, but it's still like a break on what could be, explosion economic development. But one final thought on to me, we're only scratching the surface of our energy production capabilities.
Absolutely. The God-given natural resources that we have under our feet are the key to the future prosperity of this Commonwealth. We talk a lot in our caucus about the promise of Pennsylvania. We believe in the promise of Pennsylvania, and we want to unleash it. And what we mean by that is using our natural resources to bring economic growth and opportunity back to this Commonwealth. That's what we have to embrace. And the only way out of this budgetary morass is economic growth, to allow our revenues to grow naturally. I will tell you, we've had a good couple months of revenues. That's encouraging. We need to see a lot more in the future to get us back to an area of a balance. But that's the piece to me that is critical to continue to move forward. And it's early in this budget process, but if there are ways that we can work collaboratively on using our energy resources, on more permitting reform, on slicing through bureaucratic red tape, we're ready to rock and roll, because we think that's the ultimate answer to many of the problems that ail us.
Well, Mr. Leader, thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure to reconnect. And you've made a very eloquent statement for the Republican position on the budget, and I'll be cheering you on.
Well, thank you, Chuck. It's an honor to be on your show, and you can count on me anytime.
Honor's all mine, Senator. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Volpe Report podcast. Be sure to visit our YouTube and Facebook pages for upcoming episodes. You can catch up on the Volpe Report podcast on your favorite podcast provider.